Welcome, everyone, to the Unboxing Careers Podcast, where we shed light on what different careers are really like so you can choose a career you'll really love. Today, we are unboxing the career of a pilot with Captain Mark Whitaker. But before we do, let's talk briefly about unboxing thoughtful gifts. At thoughtfulcollection.com, you can shop from a wide selection of curated products you can feel good about, helping you express friendship, gratitude, and love. The next time you need to, don't just gift, give thoughtfully at thoughtfulcollection.com. All right, I'd like to welcome to the show Captain Mark Whitaker, pilot for United Airlines. Mark, welcome to the Unboxing Careers Podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for asking me, Greg. Good to see you.
Same here. So, unlike other professions, we kind of know what a pilot does, right? So, you're flying the plane here. So, maybe instead of telling the audience what the pilot does, let's talk about maybe what makes sense. Different types of pilots. We've got co-pilots, we've got captains, we have probably, I'm sure there's something in the middle I don't really know about. So maybe break down like the differences between them, how the dynamics work between those, and we'll kind of do some level setting from that standpoint.
Okay. So for my position, I am the captain. There are usually two pilots per airplane. In fact, most cockpits now are two-pilot airplanes, but depending on the length of the stage that you're flying, you could be flying international and past a certain hour length of leg, which requires what's called a relief officer or an IRO, International Relief Officer. We've gone beyond pretty much having flight engineers, which used to just be panel guys. So now it's mainly captain, first officer, and 1 to 2 relief officers, depending on the length of the flight, that give you a break.
Very good. And do you do mostly domestic? Do you do international?
I do mostly domestic. I fly the 737. For United, that's mainly again, domestic. We do Canada. We do the Caribbean, Latin America, and we have just started touching the Azores now off Portugal, which is a pretty big stage, but it's doable for the 737.
Very good. And how about choosing your career? So full disclosure, we go back a very long time. I know you were flying at a very early age. I would say I know other pilots, and they've always wanted to be a pilot since they were very young at age. I'm sure that's not with all people, but I'm assuming it's something. What got you into wanting to be a pilot at such a young age?
Well, growing up, my folks' house was a 5-minute walk to a small airport. And by small, I mean, 2,000-foot runway, which is small by comparison to a lot of places I go nowadays. Forested, very close community. So we would take walks to watch those airplanes come and go. And that was as early as I can remember. My folks tell me, even from the age of 3, I was always interested in airplanes. So from there, it stemmed into, at the age of 15, my folks gave me a birthday gift, which was a discovery flight in a small airplane. And from that, it was like, as soon as I can do this, I want to do this.
So 2,000 feet runway, what's the 737 looking at for footage?
On the average, we go into anywhere between 9 to 12,000 foot runways, and that's on average. It can do inside of 6,000 foot runway. We go down to close to 5,000 foot places like Orange County, California. There are some other, Eugene, Oregon has some short runways, but and not much less than, let's say, 5,500 feet of runway.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit about typical day-to-day or week-to-week, whichever kind of makes sense. So kind of give the audience a breakdown about what your life actually looks like, right? Are you gone overnights? Are you coming back? Are you, the same day? How long in stretches you gone for? Kind of walk us through that if you could a little bit.
Okay, sure. So a lot of airline career is seniority driven. In fact, you would say that seniority rules all. So at my seniority, and I'm about, I'm 30% in the company, but I'm in my base, as you break it down, about 65% in the base, and that's in Cleveland. So the seniority on the captain side in the base, I'm doing typically 4-day trips, sometimes 3-day trips, but there are 2-day and 1-day trips available out there. Again, the more senior you are, the more that you can work into your schedule. But I'm looking at typically 4-day trips, sometimes 3-day trips, and they're usually something like 4 on, 3 off. Occasionally I'll get a nice big block of 4 to 5 days off. I just came off of an 8-day off stretch, which is really nice. But anyhow, Yeah, 4-day trips. Usually getting a 13 to 16 hour layover in the city that you end up in. So I'll fly typically 2 legs a day, and that's getting me from almost coast to coast. Sometimes within one region to the next, but coast to coasts tend to be 1 leg days. You get to your station, get a 16-hour, 17-hour layover, and then maybe somewhere in that 4th day or 4-day block, you'll get something shorter, like 12 hours or something. But sometimes leave the house at 5 a.m., get home by on the 4th day at 11, 12 in the 12 noon. Some days it'll stretch out a bit longer. You might see a full 4-day trip, let's say 6 in the morning push, and then get home at like 10, 11 at night. It's quite a range.
So you mentioned where you are 4 days on, 3 days off, fairly typical or typical-ish, but you also said seniority rules. So let's talk about, first, you're low man on the totem pole. Are you still doing 4 and 3? Are you doing 5 and 2, 5 and 3? How's that look?
The lowest of the low typically end up on what we call as reserve. That's like being on call.
Okay.
So you don't actually have a schedule of trips, but what you have is a block of on-call days. At my airline, it can be anywhere from 6 days on call to down to 2 days on call. It just depends on, again, seniority, what kind of block you can work out in your scheduled bidding. But that's the lowest of the lowest. So you're stuck with your phone by your side, typically 14 hours per day, let's say 6 days at a time. They can drop that. Your on-call time is usually about a 15-hour notice, but they can drop that down with a 3-hour notice. That's again, that's less seniority based and more like what scheduling needs and who's had it most recently. So it's kind of a whole other box of worms. But moving up the seniority chain, you probably end up getting more like 4-day trips, the less desirable trips, which tend to be 4 days unproductive. And when I say that, it's you get you're required to have so many hours per month flying time. Let's say it's 75 hours in a month flying. You can bang that out in 3 or 4 trips if they're really productive trips. Let's say you get a 23-hour 4-day and do that a few times a month. You've got your time. Again, the less senior you are, you start seeing trips that are more like in the 19 to 20-hour range over 4 days. You sit around for a full 30 hours in a layover. These are trips that tend to get passed up by the senior guys, and that you might see as a junior pilot. Then again, you might see fewer days off in between your work blocks. Our contract has a minimum of 2, so you might see that as a junior guy, but you're going to recover that somewhere down the road with a bigger block as well.
Okay. So those, when they're banging out a lot of hours in a short period of time, I'm assuming that's something maybe cross country, and then you shoot, I'm just making something up here. We'll go Cleveland to LA, and then we're down to Texas or something, right? So is that a fair assumption, or you take that cross country, you've got to set hours off there before you kick back up?
Yeah, it's usually multiple leg days, and that's a great assumption. It's doing like let's say Cleveland to LA up to Seattle, or you can do down to Texas like you gave. That's a good example. Something with short turns in between, so we don't lay over at a station for more than an hour or an hour and 20 minutes. Turn around, do another leg. May do a third leg in the day too. Those are the ones that are the most productive trips.
Very good. And how long have you been flying for? So I don't want to age you here, but 20 years?
In total, 30 years I've been flying for in total, from private pilot to current rank here. I've been flying with my current airline for coming up on my 17th anniversary, and I spent 5 years at regional prior to getting there.
Okay. Does traveling get old? Maybe not the flying part, but does traveling get old?
Traveling, so I have 5 kids. That's when it starts getting a little bit, not old, but more like you realize you're missing stuff. I'm getting to a point where I'm starting to make the schedule I want, but it's a long road. So the traveling doesn't get old. There's things to do. We're very crafty at finding things to do on our layovers. So that keeps it fresh. especially with a whole new crew of younger pilots coming in that bring in some fresh stuff to do. So it doesn't get old, but you start becoming more aware of what time you're losing to home. We call that quality of life. That's a reference you hear a lot in this career. So your quality of life is your time on the road versus your time at home, or the things you really want to be doing outside of work. So it doesn't necessarily for me get old, but I realize there's other things I could be doing sometimes.
So you brought up quality of life. My next question is going to be around work-life balance. So break. Let's just dig into that just a little bit more. So you said you're relatively flexible, but in the grand scheme of things, right? You're home for periods of time, and then you're gone for periods of time. But I think that stuff kind of evens out there. How would you kind of rank the work-life balance or quality of life as a career? So maybe not yourself, but as a pilot, as a career, is it overall on the good side? Is it in the middle, or overall on the bad side when you're younger? But most people are younger, don't have families, so it balances.
Yeah, I would say the younger and again more junior you are, I think you realize what you're getting into. You know, and you have more gusto to get out there and spend time on the road and see what's out there. Like you said, you have less attachments. At the point I'm at, and it's been a long road, but I would say at the point I'm at, it's the quality of life has for the most part been better than worse. Reserve life was a little tough. Summer months are real hard. Reserve life because you're almost always getting called, and that really knocks down on your days off. However, especially the way things are moving now, with all the growth at the airlines, and people are just seeing phenomenal movement amongst their seniority rankings. Quality of life is better than it's ever been. You're spending less time in reserve, getting lines faster, seeing trips that you want to see faster. And then once you figure out how to manipulate all that in your favor, you can make quality of life what you want it to be.
Perfect. And are you typically flying with the same, I'll say like two people, but like the same cluster of people, or is it all kind of round robin, hit and miss? They don't like you flying with the same people over and over again. How's that
It
work?
fluctuates quite a bit. So when I was in the first officer seat, I was seeing a lot more of the same captains, but again, it was probably the same 10 captains. Now that I've come over into the captain seat, and again, with all that growth, I'm seeing more new faces than I am familiar faces. But it changes quite a bit. And then the bigger base that you fly to. So I started out in Newark, which is a big base for us. You rarely flew with the same guy twice. So you're seeing new faces almost all the time.
Very good. Let's transition a little bit to those specifically in high school. So I'm going to make the assumption here. It's probably a bad assumption. I don't want to talk only to these people, but make the assumption that most people who think they want to be a pilot will probably become a pilot at some point, right? There's something in their lives that have gotten them to be like, hey, I want to fly a plane, which I think is very specific and unique. If you're talking to high school kids now who are either know they want to do it or maybe have an inkling to do it, there's interest there, what advice might you offer them? And this could be, it could be as simple as like beg your parents to get you flying at 15. It could be a class or a skill to learn that kind of translates to older life as a pilot that you might not think of. What would you advise for those people?
I would say that if you have any kind of interest in it, go to your local airport, go to what we call an FBO, which is a fixed base operator. That's who's renting airplanes, giving lessons. Even if you're not at the point where you can afford taking lessons, or you just don't have the time for it, or you're in high school, you're devoting a lot of time to other things. Make connections. That's really the biggest number one recommendation I can make is make connections. Talk to people who love talking about flying, because they're going to be your in down the road. I made my first 3 flying jobs through one person. And that was just,
Really?
I had a flight instructor who, I grasped onto him early on, even before I started my lessons. And then he ended up being my flight instructor. We kept in touch. I networked myself around the airport that I learned to fly at. So through him, I made 3 jobs, but through other connections, I take that back. My first job actually flying was just connections through the airport. And then the next 2 that were my actual key time building jobs to get onto my next career steps were through my flight instructor. That all started in one place. And then down the road, as you progress, just talk with people who are interested, because you never know who you're going to meet. And it's a small world. Aviation is a very small world. I run into people I know all the time, and it's amazing, the stories they have just through who they knew.
That's pretty cool. And then for college folks, right, I've got to assume that most people are probably going to some sort of aeronautical university if you're, studying to be a pilot. So this is probably a little less typical than someone who's maybe going to school that offers 20 different degrees and they want to change in there. But is there something specific you might offer to people studying in school that, I was having a conversation off the just private life a couple weeks ago, and he was a pilot, and he says, man, if I only knew this before I went to aeronautical school, I would have chosen a different school to go to. So any piece of advice you might be to offer to those in the advanced education side?
Yeah, so I did the aeronautical science route. I went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. That's a devoted degree to aviation and aviation science. So I took a minor in air traffic control while I was there, and that was pretty key because my first year with my first major airline, I got furloughed. Furlough's a layoff. Looking back, I wish I would have had a backup degree, or maybe, done the aviation thing with a business degree or something that could have, because when I was furloughed with an aviation science degree, there wasn't much I could do because nobody's hiring, during a major furlough. It was just a recession. So aviation jobs were hard to come by. And, managerial spots looked at my record and said, well, with that kind of degree, we know as soon as you get the call, you're not going to be here anymore. So, however, with that air traffic control minor, I got lucky, and ATC actually opened a off the street hire, which was kind of rare for them. But because I had that minor, I was actually able to put my name in the hat, get hired to be an air traffic controller, but I was called back to work before they put me into a class. So I did have a backup, but looking back, I would say, have a backup plan, because aviation tends to work in cycles, and that's directly related to the economy, which fluctuates rapidly. So we're in a pretty big upswing now. Everybody's kind of waiting for what's going to happen next and working on those backup plans. So if I had a way to do it differently, I certainly would have, gotten like a business degree or something like that for a backup.
Oh, it's good advice. How did you manage the whole COVID period? Because I've got to believe that was, it was stressful to begin with, but that directly impacts your business.
Yeah, that was a very scary time for all of us, not knowing where the industry was going to be. Initially, we weren't flying. We weren't flying 20% of our flights when it really peaked, if it was that. And then the story was, well, we're going to furlough 30% of our pilot group, but the reality was it's got to go deeper than that. So, but through negotiations with the union and the company, they were able to make some changes. The pilot group recognized what a unique time it was, and we came to some agreements that we, could cut down on our hourly pay for the month and, not have to furlough. So we just kind of, did what most people did, recognized we had to manage our time and our spending and things like that, and utilize, some reserves and things like that, and just kind of live it day to day, which is how we got through it.
Very good. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. Let's shift to those now. We graduate. We're brand new to the workforce, low man on the totem pole. So I guess, normally I would ask you what would separate 10 candidates here? I guess maybe the better question is, what separates a new pilot? What separates a good one from a not so good one, right? Is it attitude, eagerness? Is it something completely different? What is that separator when you're brand new to the workforce?
So if you've made it to this level, you've made it to your first major, it's the belief is you know how to fly an airplane. You probably wouldn't have made it this far if you weren't good at what you're doing. So that's understood.
Okay.
What's going to make or break you at the interview is, and then, even if you pass that and make it out into the workforce, is your professionalism, your attitude. Like you said, we love enthusiasm. We love somebody who's happy to be there and, not like, what did I just step into? And, team player. There's a chain of command. Definitely respect the chain of command, but be enthusiastic and have, your stake in the game, because we're all in it for the safety of our passengers, our flight attendants, ourselves, our families at home. We want to come home too. So, be able to recognize good situational awareness, what's around you, what's potential, and be able to make those recommendations, step up and say, hey, I think this, and be it, like I said, be a team player and make those inputs. And one of the things that I always heard, and it's not changed since I interviewed near 17 years ago, is, like I said, we know we can fly the airplane. Are you going to be able to be someone we can get along with in the cockpit for 4 days? So that's a big one.
How does that kind of manifest itself? Right. So is there a mutual understanding between the two people that even if you're having a bad day, that when they get there, you have to try to be as nice as possible? Or do you kind of get a mixed bag? I want to talk about personalities in a second. So maybe this is the good transition here. Like, these are people, right? So everyone's going to have different personalities. They're going to have different things. They're going to have good days and bad days and personal things going on in their lives. How does that manifest when it gets to two people in a cockpit? Is it best be on your best behavior always, or does it bleed?
Well, so the captain kind of sets the tone. That's a term we use a lot. Is the captain's going to set the tone for how the trip's going to go. So a lot of it rests on our shoulders to make this.
Okay.
How is this cockpit going to work? Are we going to be open and allow for suggestions? Are we going to be closed? Are we going to? There's not. We used to have a big group of pilots, and this is kind of an older school mentality that was kind of like, you're there, and that's your place, and this, I run all this, and just kind of speak up when absolutely necessary. That dynamic is changing. We've recognized that crew resource management is an important key to safety. So a lot more of the captains now are giving a briefing when we show up. First time I'm meeting this person, I'll say, here's what I expect. Good teamwork, good verbalize, verify, monitor, which is a skill you learn in training. Always make suggestions. If you have questions or concerns about the way I'm operating, tell me. Absolutely tell me, because it's not my intention to do things unsafe or out of the way we normally do things. So setting a tone like that is a good way to bring somebody new or somebody you haven't flown with before as a first officer into the loop and saying, I can work with this guy. I can be who I am and make the suggestions I want to make. Now on the first officer side, it's a bit like being a chameleon. It always has been, it always will be. You're dealing with a lot of different personalities, and once they've made it to that captain seat, they recognize that it's their show. And there's a lot of ways to run with that ball. So as a first officer, you recognize, what kind of personality traits you're dealing with, how to kind of mold yourself to working with those traits, and developing just for that trip the way you're going to speak and, promote safety in a way that's going to, keep the team dynamic. So it's interesting. I hear about it all the time from guys I fly with, and it's no different than when I was in the right seat as well.
I've got to follow up. You mentioned make suggestions. So I'm a curious guy, and I'm going, well, flying a plane, it's not like a suggestible thing, right? You've got very certain specific things you need to do to fly that plane that keep it going. Like, can you give me an example of a suggestion someone's making?
Well, okay, so let's take the obvious. You're on final approach. That's a very a stressful, high tension kind of scenario for most of our flights. Things are moving fast and they're very dynamic. So we have a set of parameters that we have to meet at certain points throughout the approach. Certain altitudes, we're looking for configurations, and by that I mean flaps and landing gear. We're looking for air speeds. We're looking for am I left or right of center line? Am I high or low on the glide slope? These are things that we have parameters for, and if we're not within those parameters and just not recognizing it or just not correcting for it, as a pilot monitoring, and that could be either the captain or the first officer, because we both take turns flying. It's up to the pilot monitoring to suggest, check your glide path, check your airspeed, yeah. So
Gotcha.
things like that, or just like, let's take a more, kind of like a wider spectrum type of scenario. You're looking at some weather down the road, and the captain or the first officer, whoever's flying, says, I want to take this path to get around this weather, this line of thunderstorms. And you look at it and you say, I don't know, that doesn't look like the best path that we could choose. So, that's a good time to come up with a tactical way of saying, here's why I think it might be better to go the other way or something.
Okay. A great example.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. So I want to stay on personalities real quick before we go. From a pilot perspective, so do you find there's a common, I don't want to say common personality, but maybe a common trait that someone might have that you find among either successful or / happy pilots in the field? Or is it just grab something out of a hat and hope you like it?
I would say that the pilots that I've flown with, and I try to include myself in this category, so I'm glad you asked. I try to be real, let's say optimistic. The guys that are more, guys and girls that are more optimistic about the day, they show up with a good attitude. And there's going to be a lot of situations that come up that don't go to the mold. You have this plan, and pilots love plans. We love to have a plan laid out in front of us. We love to have the plan go step to step, point A to point B, everything works out the way it should. But that doesn't happen a lot. There's a lot of little things that show up. And that's from, boarding issues, like I mentioned before, weather, air traffic control delays. Things will change the way your plan was meant to go. But if you keep an upbeat attitude about it and a positive, like I said, optimistic outlook, look for your outs. Here's how we can handle this differently and still have a successful outcome, and not let the little things get to you. Those are the pilots I've always enjoyed flying with, and that's where I've taken a lot of my attitude from as well, in the left seat.
Very good. This is not really pilot specific, but it's something that I think is important, especially if we talk to the younger people listening to this podcast. Social media profiles. So how would you advise, I'm sure, if you ever hired for something, some areas it could be illegal, but like, you're Googling them and you're going to see what's out there, right? Is this person got pictures on Instagram, chugging beers all day long, right? How would you advise like those people in high school, maybe in college, to treat their social media profiles?
Well, if you're dead set, you're going to go into a profession like this, that you want to start, treating your social media professionally. As soon as you step foot on property with a regional airline, a major airline, anybody that has any sort of stake out there in the public world, they're going to start managing your social media. And I don't say that they get directly involved. However, if something slips out there, you made a comment about your workplace or the way things are being handled, or a coworker, things like that. That's grounds for termination at a lot of places. So be very careful. Maybe start disciplining yourself now to manage that sort of thing.
Yeah. Very good. How about a misconception about your job? We've got stereotypes for everything. I'm not going to ask you to do a pilot voice today, although if you do one, we'll get it. But like, what's a common misconception about your job?
I would say the biggest one is the button pusher thing, that we all just sit down and push buttons. I would love to say that my job is that easy, but it's rarely that easy. And then the other thing is that, you're going on vacation all the time, heading off to these wonderful destinations, going to the hotel. It's not the greatest. I would say it's not the greatest thing. I mean, in terms of like, it's not an all-inclusive vacation every time you go. So, but the button pushing thing, I would say, is the biggest misconception. We're working hard from the time we show up to the aircraft, even before that, just pre-flight planning. We're looking at all the angles, all the weather, all the delays possible, aircraft issues. From the time we show up to the airport, we're at work. From the time we block in and shut the airplane down, there's never a moment that goes by that we're not thinking, about our contingencies. What do we do if this happens? What do we do if that happens? Sort of thing. So we're never just kind of sitting up there twiddling our thumbs. We're hard at work. Rest assured.
Very good. No one's ever let me fly the plane before. They let kids up there. They never let me up there. It's a total bummer. How about, you might have answered this already, Mark, so feel free to use the same answer as before about having a backup degree or like business degree or something. But what about your industry do you wish you knew sooner?
That's a tough question. I wish that I would have known, more about the swings and the jeopardy. Like I said, we were talking earlier about the direct relation between the airline industry and the economy. I wish I had a better grasp on that. Just knowing what kind of backups I might need to have in place. I would say that's the biggest one.
Very good. And Mark, what did I forget to ask you today?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't think of much. I think you covered all the bases. If anything else, I could just, mention as a professional pilot and a captain, how much of a manager you are, and the team player thing. When we show up to the aircraft, you're a team player with your co-pilot, but you're also a team player with the folks in back, and that by that I mean your flight attendants. They're as much part of the game as you are. Their role is sometimes overlooked for its importance. And, just remember that when you show up to the airplane, to treat them nicely, because they're going to be there if something ever happens, just as much as you are.
I will tell you, it is amazing. I try to treat everyone nicely, sometimes better than others. Probably the last 7 times I've flown with my wife, I do a lot of traveling, just used to when I was speaking a lot more, individually, but I think the last 7 times me and her have gone somewhere, it's, I don't know, maybe a trip just to get away without the kids. They're always throwing free beer at me. So I must be extremely nice to them, because they're just like, oh, here's some drinks. They single me out. So me and my wife always joke about it. So I must be really nice to those people, which is great. So, Mark, nothing to do with pilots. Turbulence. Big issue, an annoyance. What is turbulence from a pilot's perspective?
From a pilot's perspective, so knowing about turbulence, pilots recognize it's just a day-to-day thing, and for the most part, it'd have to be the most extreme thing you've ever experienced for it to be that dangerous. So turbulence to us, just from a working standpoint, yeah, it's a bit of an annoyance, something to try to work around. But you recognize that you're dealing with a lot of different experience levels in the form of your passengers who may be frequent flyers, they may not be. It's maybe their first time ever getting in the air. Yeah. So you recognize that that moderate turbulence, that you're trying to find a way out of it as quick as you can, could be the worst thing in the world for those folks back there. So you're trying to keep in mind their safety, their knowledge. Let's get seated with seatbelts fastened, because somebody just might not even know that's the thing to do. That's where I among many things, keep them in mind. My passengers, let's make sure they're informed about what's going on. Try to calm them down, because we're going to get through this. But there's some that just, oh my God, this is absolutely horrible. And, so as most reassuring you can be to try to help them through that is the best policy.
Very good. Final question for you, Mark. Can't be in aeronautics anymore. No, you're a traffic controller, nothing. You have to choose a different career. Which one are you choosing?
That's a great question, because I ask myself that a lot. And I'm not sure I have the best answer for that. I probably would have gone into teaching or something like that, because at this point, teaching or a managerial position of some sort, because that's what I'm doing right now. I teach. I'm a manager in the left seat. I guess that would be the closest thing to it, because I've been in flying for so long. I'm not really sure what else I could do. But if I had to pick something that was relatable, that would be it.
Very good. Well, Mark, thank you for your time today. If someone wants to reach out either to you or they just want to learn more about being a pilot, any resources you might be able to offer them for them to turn to?
Yeah. Are you talking in terms of personal or?
Yeah, personal.
Yeah, I'm always reachable through email, and I can give that to you if you like.
You could throw it out, or I could throw it in the show notes, whatever you
Yeah,
prefer.
sure. You can use my email, which is Mark MARK dot Whitaker WHITEAKER at United.com. If anybody has any questions or would look for more resources or info, I'd be absolutely happy to help them out. The other thing too is there are some aviation colleges programs rather to look into as far as the majors they're recruiting and things like that. United's is Aviate, the Aviate program. That's something to look into. Just if you're looking to just get started, get your foot in the door, that's a great place to start. But if that's not your cup of tea, most of the majors have a version of that.
Very cool. We'll link that in the show description as well. So Captain Mark Whitaker, everyone, pilot for United Airlines. Find out more about Mark, the Aviate, which we just talked about. Check out the show description or show notes, whichever, however you're consuming the podcast. I do hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to unbox your career with us, we'd love to have you. Please visit unboxingcareerspodcast.com to find out more. And until next time, be kind to one another.